calling all credit unions and fintechs. Today's FSI Spotlight is with Mark Sievewright. Mark is a highly sought after board advisor, fintech board advisor for credit unions. He was a payments expert way back in the 90s. He served at Fiserv for 12 years as president of their Credit Union Solutions division. He recently wrote a book and it's available on Amazon. It's called Digital Life, and in our spotlight today we actually got to speak about that book, its contents and its relevance, its target audience. He explained to us how he advises credit unions around digital innovation and transformation, and he explained to us that the single most important piece in the full puzzle of innovation is people. I really enjoyed our conversation with Mark, and I know you will too. Let's jump in. Mark, I cannot thank you enough for making the time to do our spotlight today. Welcome.
Lance, thank you. It's really terrific to be with you. I've been following the financial services innovators community on LinkedIn for a while now. So thank you for reaching out to me and for giving me this opportunity.
Wonderful. So you have, Mark, a very impressive resume, if I say so myself. It represents decades of experience empowering credit unions to grow, collaborate, and to serve their members better. Can you possibly give us a 3-minute version of who Mark Sievewright is and what you're all about?
Absolutely, Lance. Well, first of all, as you probably can tell, I'm not from southern Mississippi. So I grew up in Wales in the United Kingdom, and I became an American citizen about 8 years ago, having lived here for over 20 years. So yeah, welcome to the club, right? And I'm honored. That's one of the most, I think, things in my life that I'm most proud of. So it's wonderful to be here officially. So my career began over 3 decades ago, Lance. I started life as a banker at HSBC and went through all the traditional retail banking jobs, and was privileged to be part of the team that launched the world's first debit card back in the 1980s. Can you believe that? It feels like yesterday to me.
Wow.
And then I segued from that wonderful time to MasterCard International in Brussels, and I ran marketing for Europe, Middle East, and Africa there for a while. And then I emigrated to the United States. I ran 2 companies, Payment Systems, Inc. and Tower Group, which was here where I live in New England. It was born out of an MIT think tank. And that gave me, back in the year 2000, Lance, that was a great year to join a technology think tank, right? Y2K. That gave me my love and passion for technology. And I ran that business for a number of years and worked with just wonderful people. And then I joined Fiserv, the big technology company. And I was there for 12 years and spent half that time running the credit union division for Fiserv. Just a wonderful organization. And I got to work with over 2,000 of America's credit unions, which was just a privilege for me. And 4 years ago, I launched my own advisory firm. Just had a wonderful experience working with clients that I have a passion for in terms of what they're doing, what they're focused on each and every day. And here I am now today with you.
That is amazing. Well, and now you're an author as well. So your very first book, correct me if I'm wrong, but your very first book, Digital Life, was just published last week. Tell us a little bit about that book and who you wrote it for.
Oh, well, thank you for mentioning it. Shameless plug, Lance. There it is. Although it'll probably be reading backwards for you right now. But 20 years ago, when I became the CEO at Tower Group, as I mentioned, that technology think tank, I crossed paths with my co-author, a gentleman called Guillermo, who I was fortunate to hire at Tower Group. He's now a Microsoft executive, 2 decades on. And Guillermo and I kept in touch through the years, remained great friends and collaborators. And we had an idea about 18 months ago that we should try to lay out a roadmap for digital transformation. Now, Lance, little did we know, little did the world know, that COVID-19 was lurking in the background as we were authoring our book. And when we finished the manuscript in March of this year, that's when we wrapped the manuscript up. COVID-19 became a reality for many of us. So we went back in and just adapted the manuscript a little bit. And what we discovered, quite very candidly, was a lot of the views we'd expressed in Digital Life about how fast the world was changing, how financial institutions had to adapt, were being accelerated by COVID-19. So the book is out. Thank you for mentioning it. It's been successful so far. We keep getting some real nice comments. And the way I would summarize it is, if someone really wanted to understand the key changes that are going on in our industry today and the importance of digital transformation, then Digital Life is the kind of the book for you. And it's been a wonderful collaborative experience. Most of it written on Microsoft Teams, as you might imagine, because Guillermo and I weren't able to spend a lot of time together, given we live in different places. And little did we know that the whole world would be using Zoom and Microsoft Teams and WebEx and so on for the remainder of this year. So it was a great experience, Lance.
That's great. So congratulations, of course, are in order. Help me understand, is this book targeted specifically to decision makers in financial services? Can you maybe paint out 2 or 3 personas? So if you're a blank at a blank, you need this book. Can you do that for us?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So the short answer is yes, it is written for financial services decision makers. Although my sister called me yesterday from Wales and said she was halfway through and still understands it. So that's pretty good, right? She's not in our industry at all. But my recommendation would be that if you are a CEO, if you are in the C-suite, in other words, CMO, CIO, CTO, CLO, CSO, all those combinations, this book gives you a true understanding of all of the moving parts, Lance, in our industry. I call it zooming out. The book allows you to zoom out and really take a look at how the world is changing. So I think it's vital for decision makers to understand that. But I have to tell you, some of my clients have said, relatively junior people in their organization have seen it, read it, and really enjoyed it. So maybe it has broader appeal than we were originally targeting.
So, Mark, I was researching credit unions earlier in 2020, right around March and April when you had completed your manuscript. And I had discovered, I can't recall if you had written something or you were speaking in a video, because you're all over the web at this point. But you were speaking about Carpe Diem for credit unions. Unpack that for us. And also, is that in your book? Is it complimentary? Can you do that for us?
Well, my goodness, Lance, you really do your research. I'm impressed. Thank you for taking the time to prepare so thoroughly for this conversation. So I did indeed. I wrote a report in March called New Realities in Financial Services. And it was because of COVID, Lance. I saw some of the early signals, and I saw the potential impact on our industry of a pandemic. And I wrote a report that not only spelled out what I thought COVID-19 might mean for our industry economically, financially, and so on, but also that this was a time for credit unions to double down on a number of their key investments in digital and payments. And that's why I wrote this kind of seize the day report, Lance, because I felt, yes, we know that return on assets or profitability is going to be challenging. We know that our loan loss provisions are driving that. We know that our interchange revenue from card transactions is down because no one was going out shopping, or at least not planning to, particularly during shutdown that came later. And so this was a moment where you really needed courageous leadership. You needed to be able to say, look, the key strategies around digital and electronic payments are the right ones. They are the long-term strategies for our industry. Let's double down on them. And that was, the essence of the report. And ironically, Lance, I released that report around the last time I actually traveled, which was to the Credit Union National Association's huge annual conference in DC, which is called the Governmental Affairs Conference. And more than 5,000 people were at that conference, Lance, back in March. That was the last time I traveled, ironically.
So we can go all the way back to June 2017 when you, Mark, said that we're living in unprecedented times as far as like the speed and impact of technology change. So you're right, absolutely right now. You were absolutely right, 3.5 years ago? Maybe take us back 3.5 years ago, and how has technology unfolded over the years? Is it accelerating? How predictable is it? And what's 2021 going to look like? I mean, that's like 17 questions in one question, but I'll let you take that wherever you like.
Oh, well, thank you. Kudos again to your research. So at that time, I just met with a group of CEOs. Remember the days when we could actually meet in person? And I met with a group of CEOs and I said, how many of you think the pace of technology change is fast? And of course, they all agreed, yes, it was. And I said, well, this is the slowest it's going to be for the rest of your lives, right? Which caused quite a reaction among that group. And it struck me, Lance, that what was really beginning to happen, and it had been underway for more than a decade, obviously, but we were going to hit that inflection point where digital interactions and digital transactions began to really outpace their physical equivalents. And of course, we'd met an inflection point in financial services branches, a number of years ago, right? Where we've seen branch volume declining as digital volume increased. But now we were taking a real quantum leap, and digital was becoming the thing that bank customers and credit union members would prefer first. And it's no coincidence, by the way, that when you look at the consumer satisfaction indices, the various players that track consumer satisfaction with banks and credit unions, that the banking community has actually been able to narrow the gap. In fact, overtake credit unions in the last year or two in their levels of satisfaction. And that's almost exclusively, in my opinion, due to digital solutions. So I felt it was important for me to talk to I have a passion for credit unions, as you know, to talk to my constituents about digital transformation, the key strategies they had to pursue to be successful. And, I have to give them a lot of credit, because when I look back on some of the advances that credit unions have made since then, they've really moved the ball down the field, Lance, from a digital perspective. And I give them a lot of credit for that.
Specific to technology, are there any emerging technologies, whether you want to talk about just a trend in terms of how technologies are used, or a specific technology such as artificial intelligence, data, etc., that you see really changing the game for credit unions in 2021? So what should we be watching for? What should we be preparing for?
Well, you touched on them. For me, Lance, I call them the big four, the big four emerging technologies. Artificial intelligence is clearly one of those. I'm privileged to I sit on the advisory board of some AI firms, some of which are probably part of your FSI community. Micronotes in Boston is a great example, which is an AI company that enables banks and credit unions to be more successful, really powerful. Secondly, analytics. And I think from the standpoint of data, we've heard these expressions, data is the new oil or the new gold or whatever it is. But we sit on mountains of data about customers and members from a bank and credit union perspective. And we hardly touch it, Lance, in terms of the potential we have to make good use of it. I really think now we've hit an inflection point for the adoption of data analytics, and of course, data warehousing as a precursor to that. And I really see financial institutions becoming much smarter at targeting their consumer customers or members and servicing them in a different way through stronger analytics. The third is biometrics, which, is kind of a surprise, I guess, right? Given this touchless environment we are living in right now. But actually, facial recognition is one of those touchless biometrics. And I see more and more sort of voice, fingerprint, palm print, facial recognition techniques rolling out over the next several years. And the fourth one is somewhat linked to that: video banking. So I think one of the things we've learned during the pandemic is that we can, as financial institutions, serve our members or customers in a much better way than we ever thought through tools like video. And I think video is going to follow two paths. I think almost every ATM is going to become an ITM, an interactive teller machine in this country this decade. And then when you and I are interacting with our financial institution, we will have the option, Lance, to do that through video if we so choose, pretty much universally by the time we get to 2030. So I'm watching all of those. I know you follow this industry incredibly well and closely, but this week, we've seen cybersecurity news come out on all the sort of news channels, right? The so-called actions of the Russian groups that are involved in that. Cybersecurity is fundamentally important to our future. And so I'm kind of excited by some of the initiatives going on around biometrics. Within the credit union space right now, there's an initiative called Member Pass, which is a digital identity solution that's being developed by a CUSO that's a credit union service organization, called CU Ledger. That, I think, has high potential. And I think across the sort of spectrum of cybersecurity, we're seeing more and more AI-enabled solutions emerging, Lance. I just witnessed a demo by a company called Fiverity, which you may be familiar with, but they're an artificial intelligence-enabled organization that tracks synthetic identity fraud and addresses it and identifies it. We're going to see a lot more of those types of solutions this decade to help us manage the cyber threat.
So, Mark, you mentioned the CUSO. So explain what the CUSO model is, or CUSO. Help us understand how to say it as well, and why is it such an important vehicle in terms of collaboration and innovation?
So here we are, a real American asking a Welsh American how to pronounce something, Lance. Come on. Tomato, right?
Yes.
So it's CUSO, and it's Credit Union Service Organization, CUSO. Here's the simple definition of a CUSO. It is a credit union owned and controlled organization. So in other words, credit unions are shareholders, for want of a better term, in an organization that is a CUSO. And they act as the key stakeholders in the decision-making of that CUSO and its strategy and what it focuses on. And there are a number of notable CUSOs in the credit union space. One that many credit unions will be familiar with is PSCU, Payment Systems for Credit Unions, who do an incredibly good job of managing debit and credit card processing, among other things. In fact, I just read, Lance, before joining you, that PSCU just announced a $36 million dividend this year for their constituents, which is the largest on record. There are other credit unions in the loan origination space, in the data processing space, there are a number of CUSOs. So these organizations bring together pools of credit union members and technology budgets and develop scale that individually many of these credit unions could not produce. So it's a collaborative venue for credit unions to access solutions at a cheaper price than they would otherwise be able to do individually. So they're pretty good at helping innovation and allowing credit unions to keep pace with innovation, Lance. That's one of the benefits I always think of.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if I'm a fintech and I want to appeal to credit unions. I feel like I can create value for credit unions. Do I need to be pursuing the CUSOs, or do I just go ahead and pursue the individual credit unions, and the CUSOs come along for the ride? Help us understand how, from a transaction perspective, how that works.
A very, very astute question. Yeah. So a fintech could actually approach a CUSO. And in fact, I mentioned PSCU a few minutes ago. They have a number of fintech relationships in place, for example, as does CU Ledger that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So the fintechs can go directly to the CUSOs, Lance, and embed their solution into the CUSO model or ecosystem, or they can go individually to an individual credit union. I have a client in St. Louis, it's called West Community Credit Union, that's now on its fourth fintech partnership. Here in the Boston area where I live, Digital Credit Union, DCU, hosts fintechs at an innovation lab in the center of Boston. So around the country, there are lots of examples where fintechs are either dealing with CUSOs or they're working with individual credit unions. And I applaud both sides of that, because if you think of fintechs as just a competitor versus an opportunity to collaborate, I think you're missing something.
So let's talk about the situation when credit unions are really unable to transform or unable to innovate. What are those challenges that are keeping credit unions from keeping up? What's getting in the way of the adoption of these emerging technologies?
The credit union space, as you know, is a mix or combination of over 5,000 institutions of different sizes, radically different sizes, Lance. There is the 1 billion asset and above category of credit unions, which frankly controls more than 70% of all the assets in the credit union space and drives much of the growth within the credit union movement. But then we've got 3,500 credit unions who are categorized as small in terms of asset size. And that's where the dynamic to your question comes in. The primary barrier, I think, to keeping up is resource, or our resources, right? People and money. That is a huge barrier if you're a 50 million asset credit union versus a $5 billion credit union. There's a gulf of difference between those two. And so the CUSO model that we just talked about is an opportunity for the smaller credit unions to actually collaborate with each other and gain more scale advantages that sort of overcome their size. So resources are key. The other thing which is often overlooked, I think, Lance, in the barriers to innovation are the legacy technology environments that a lot of credit unions have. And some of them are operating, for example, on very old core processing systems that don't have a lot of openness to them. They don't have a lot of feature functionality built into them. They're very basic, actually, and aren't able to be leveraged with these new technologies that you and I have talked about this morning here in our call. I think the other thing is mindset. And I know that's kind of a soft point there, a qualitative point that I'm making, but the attitude of an executive to innovation and technological change is fundamental. And I would argue that without a digital mindset, you cannot proceed with digital transformation. It's not enough to just go and buy technology, Lance, as you know, and bring it in. You've got to be able to combine people, technology, business process, and data. You've got to combine those four things and bring those to bear, inside your organization, whether it's through partnership with others or individually, to truly drive innovation.
So I'm imagining myself potentially as a decision maker at a smaller credit union. I have a legacy system in the back room, potentially in the cloud. And every time I suggest to my team, why don't we do this? Or we can improve member services in this way. And someone mentions, well, we can't do that because of the legacy system. I'm just imagining that could potentially happen or is happening. What is your response to that? What would I do as the decision maker? Is there a way to modernize these legacy systems without having to completely rip them out and replace them?
In some cases, yes. There is the possibility to, perhaps if you're running that system in-house, you've licensed the software and you're running it yourself, which is not as popular these days as it used to be, by the way, then you could basically outsource that solution and gain the advantages of essentially having that core processing solution modernized and run for you. So you can turn the lights off at night and go home and not have to worry about it. So yes, but I think the biggest challenge, Lance, is being able to say, look, this is holding us back. If it is the core system and you're not able to modernize it by outsourcing to an alternative platform, you have to change it. I mean, you literally have to go and replace it. And I think over the next 3-5 years, we're going to see a lot of activity in the core processing space where credit unions and banks are getting ready for their digital futures by saying, look, the back office is actually what's holding us back. And so let's figure it out. Let's change business processes. Let's change our core platform. And the thing that I would add to it is that the solutions that now surround the core platform, online banking, mobile banking, loan origination, and so on, those have actually become more valuable, Lance, than the core itself. Because those are the things that are addressing member experience or customer experience and are driving the efficiency of your credit union. A little bit tongue in cheek, I call it putting an end to mullet banking. Now, mullet banking, I use that term because if you've ever witnessed a good mullet hairstyle on someone, the front looks great, right? Looks great from the front. But from the back, it's a holy mess back there, Lance. And so the front of the credit union or bank looks great. Our branches look great. Our online banking and mobile banking apps look great. But at the back office, oftentimes it's a holy mess. And we have to figure that out. Put an end to mullet banking.
I absolutely love that. I'm going to steal that.
You're welcome.
So let's pivot a little bit. It's really the same conversation using different words, and I want to see if your answer is different. If we take a second and we stop talking about emerging technology or technology trends, but instead we talk about innovation. And if we go back to the scenario where I'm a decision maker at a credit union, perhaps one of the smaller credit unions, is how can I approach innovation or adopt innovation in an affordable way that doesn't literally break the bank?
Yeah, great question. So don't look at innovation. My first piece of advice would be don't look at innovation as technology or as only technology. Look at how you currently do business. Look at how you can improve your internal processes, even without touching some of your technologies or technology vendors or partners. Look at how you can improve things from within. And that's the sort of people, process, data piece of my quadrants a few minutes ago. Then the technology piece, of course, becomes vitally important. And that's the ability to enable the change you need to make. And in that sense, I would really encourage people to evaluate their technology systems, Lance, in a very formal way, to say, look, what is holding us back? If we have the wrong loan origination solution, even if we're a small credit union, let's look for a better mousetrap and let's bring that inside. But technology is never going to improve poor business process. And so focusing on how you do business and improving that from within, I think is a vital first step to innovation.
That's wonderful. Are there any agencies, for lack of a better word, third parties or service providers who are coming into credit unions and offering objective third-party advice, facilitating innovation, trying to help the credit union just level up?
Yeah, well, I try to do that individually, with my clients. And across the industry, there are a number of firms who will either engage with you or with the credit unions on technology selection and evaluations, advisory support, and so on. Myriad organizations, frankly, Lance, more perhaps than are needed. And I would say most of them do a very good job. I think for the credit union executive, it starts with strategy. What are we trying to achieve? And then working to enable that through the engagement, if necessary, of one of these organizations. But the landscape is pretty broad of firms that at least purport to say, we can help you. The choice is very wide.
So, Mark, if you were me preparing for an interview with Mark Sievewright, what is one great question that you would have asked you if you were me?
That's a great question. It really is. I think the fundamental thing, Lance, in everything that we do today is we cannot escape that people make the difference. So even in this world of technology that you and I love and we have a passion for, we can never forget that it's actually people who make the difference. So I would want to explore attitudes towards leadership, personal traits that are about how you would develop and mentor, a workforce. And things that were buzzwords several years ago, like emotional intelligence and EQ ratios and so on, right? I would come back to some of those because I think we're now living in a time where, ironically, given the focus on technology, we need people who can really inspire other people and make good decisions for their businesses around how you enable technology to build a better organization. So I guess I would explore more of your own attitudes towards leadership more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. How can our listeners follow you online, Mark?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I'm on all of the major social media platforms, Lance. Twitter, I am at msieve, MSIEVE. With a name like mine, you got to abbreviate. I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, Mark Sievewright on LinkedIn. And my website is sievewrightandassociates.com, A-N-D spelled out, sievewrightandassociates.com. And it's full of, I hope, useful information. And I'm so happy that, you found me through those social networks too. It's been great getting to know you.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you so much for your time today. It truly has been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And thanks to Plaxent also for sponsoring this, Lance. I
Absolutely.
really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Take care.
Take care.